Solar Ash is a Relaxtion platformer. When I was playing the Pathless for the first time a couple of weeks ago, I know I'm late, I've been playing a lot of stuff, okay? I noticed it was a little tough to pin down what its genre was. It didn't feel like a platformer, it wasn't much of a shooter or an action game outside of some very brief sections, so it didn't feel like it was any of the genres it was listed as, it felt like it was just a small slice of each. I settled on my own genre for the game, a Relaxtion puzzle game, indicating that the action was de-emphasized compared to other titles, being much more about flow than it was about fight, and the rest of the game was just some basic puzzle solving. Solar Ash has been compared by many, including me, to the Pathless, but I classify it as something slightly different, something that I hope we see a lot more of in the future. A Relaxtion platformer. Solar Ash is a game that's stripped down and focused, and that's what I like about it. It features vast open environments, massive bosses, and amazing art direction, but what occupies this world and your core gameplay loop is kept entirely to the essentials. Gameplay-wise, you can break this game up into 3 parts: movement/platforming, combat, and time-based puzzles. Movement was a little bit hard to get used to at first, which is the case with most games that have a character with serious momentum. Sometimes turning was hard, sometimes even running in a straight line felt difficult, boosting made me feel out of control, but after the first of 6 areas, which is also the shortest one being less than half the length of some of the later areas, I felt like I had a really good handle on the basics, and if you saw me now during my attempt at the platinum after finishing the game, you'd see me flying around like a lunatic pulling off really fluid moves against bosses, because this is a game where you feel yourself getting better and better as it goes along. Your suite of moves is given to you in full from the beginning. You can walk, skate, double jump, boost, grapple, rail grind, and climb. It's a pretty standard makeup with an infusion of high speeds that make it feel really satisfying to play from start to finish. And this also increases replay value because it's always a bummer to start a fresh file and lose everything you just gained and feel powerless for hours on end, but here you don't feel that. You don't feel anchored down during a replay because you have everything that you had at the beginning that you had at the end. And the game's trophies even encourage you to use that enhanced sense of comfort to try your hand at a little speed running. And I've almost enjoyed my second hardcore difficulty speedrun playthrough more than my first because jetting around like this just feels so satisfying. Platforming on its own isn't all that challenging, but it's fun to bullet around and try and keep a long chain of unencumbered movement going, something which I've praised Ori for in the past. You just want to keep one fluid motion for as long as possible, and my only complaint on that front is that the aim assist on the rails isn't great. Most games you can just hold the left stick in the direction you want to go and press jump, but here there's a much higher chance of you over or under shooting it. Probably since this game features more of an open level design than something like, say, Ratchet & Clank, and the player might want to get off the rail entirely instead of switching sides, which I do get, but it was the most frequent source of my movement being halted. When we talk about the time puzzle elements of this game though, is where the movement and platforming gets really interesting. Every area in this game is full of a certain amount of anomalies, 3 in the first area, and then that number increases in every subsequent location, and a massive anomaly, which is kind of the area boss, and your goal is to basically get rid of all of them. Every anomaly has a certain sequence of poles, I guess? I'm gonna call them poles. There's a certain sequence of poles that you have to hit in succession to open up or reach a weak spot for your character to stab. After you hit one of these poles, you have a certain amount of time to reach the next one and hit it, otherwise the surface around you heats up and you get hit and sent back to a checkpoint. This is the majority of gameplay. You have to find these anomalies which you can scan to locate. You're given a puzzle where you have to move really quickly to hit the sequence of poles, sometimes needing to get creative with your route. Upon succeeding, you purge the anomaly, and then once you do that for the whole area, you hop on the back of a massive creature and do the same in a sequence that really tests your speed and precision. This goes on for roughly 6 hours, that's how long it took me to finish the game, and honestly speaking, I don't think it ever gets boring. The level of variety in each puzzle is inspired, and they all pose different difficulties. Sometimes you need to be really fast, sometimes they require a bit of setup, sometimes you need to be smart with which direction you start with. I never felt like I was doing the same thing, even though realistically I was. I played this on the hardest setting you can pick without beating the game first, and I would recommend to anyone who wants a challenge and wants to be pushed to do the exact same. Difficulty affects things related to speed rather than hit points or damage or anything of the sort, so your windows of time to complete puzzles are tightened and your enemies attack faster. From the second I started the game, I had some pretty tight time frames, not enough to make me feel frustrated, but enough to give me a real sense of urgency during each puzzle. And I think that's why I felt more comfortable with the bosses than I've seen some reviewers say who played it on normal. Dying to a boss means a really quick reload, there's no long run-ups or a massive reset of progress. Bosses have 3 health bars each, and if you get hit and fall off, those bars don't regenerate. The only time they regenerate rate I think is if you die completely, but with how many shields are lying around everywhere, as long as you're being mindful, you shouldn't end up fully dying to a boss. I usually got through most health bars in one go, with a few of them on a couple enemies taking me a bit closer to 5 or 6 tries, but it's so fast to get back into it that I really didn't mind that at all. I think the challenging difficulty setting puts you in the right mindset for these bosses, and they can feel fair and doable. It sounds like people who first played it on normal felt a bit of a difficulty spike, so regardless of what you end up choosing, I've laid out what you should expect. I absolutely love fast movement and timed modes in games, so every one of these anomalies were beyond enjoyable to destroy, and I especially loved the bosses. The game does a great job of giving you set pieces that you're actually playing, and while Shadow of the Colossus is an influence that's worn on its sleeve, your actual actions once you get onto a beast are so different that it never feels like a copycat. Moments between the anomalies where you're picking up plasma, which is used to upgrade your shield, or you're activating jump pads, or you're exploring for suit parts, feel like a nice, calm downtime in between these moments. Solar Ash does a really good job at making even its high-intensity moments feel satisfying and relaxing, but in these moments it's just chill and serene, and it's nice to have all that between the monster stabbings. All I have to say on the combat is something that I already kind of said in my video talking about Solar Ash a few months ago. Combat is here in service of the movement and fluidity. It's less a standalone mechanic and more a way to add a tiny bit of spice to areas. It's there for you to sort of tear up some fodder enemies while moving at top speeds, and very occasionally it asks you to stop and take on an enemy that you even have to dodge once or twice, but that's about it. Combat isn't good or bad, it's just sort of there, and for a game like this, I think that's fine. But I do know that some people are a little disappointed that we don't have a more combat-focused game after Hyper Light Drifter. I've spent the majority of this review discussing the gameplay because that's 90% of what you're doing, but of course there's a few other things to discuss here. The music is beautiful and peaceful at most times, with the bosses really amping up the synths and picking up the tempo. The music in this game is as weird and beautiful and unorthodox as the visuals are, which I won't spend too much time talking about because you can kind of just see it for yourself, but they did an amazing job making the game feel stylized and almost abstract while still being substantive. This doesn't look like a different world, it looks like a different universe. The art style blends with the setting seamlessly, and the game manages to look like nothing I've seen before. And considering just how many settings and art styles are out there, that's incredibly impressive. The world is pretty open, or at least the areas are, but don't expect it to be filled with inhabitants. At most areas will have one NPC with a quest that you can follow, and that's it. These characters and quests remind me a bit of Death's Door from earlier this year. Maybe none are quite as memorable as the ones in that game, primarily due to their less unique character designs, but they have their own small tragic tales that aren't essential to the experience, but they're a nice addition to the game. It's clear the developers wanted some depth to the world, but they didn't want to take away from the focus of the main loop, so don't go into this expecting a typical open world game. The story is solid, but it definitely takes a back seat. Hyper Light Drifter hit that spot where most of the story was ideas and flashes of images and driven by mystery, but Solar Ash does that thing a lot of indie games do where it's not cryptic or reliant on environmental storytelling enough to prompt a sense of mystery, but it's not fleshed out enough to feel like you're experiencing anything of too much substance. These kinds of stories end up being the most forgettable and the least interesting in the moment, and while Solar Ash's story isn't bad, I doubt I'll remember much outside of the ending if you ask me about it a year from now. I had a couple of really minor bugs and a few moments where it felt like the game was dropping frames, but they weren't game-breaking / they went away pretty quickly. The only bug I can properly recall was once or twice when I grappled up to a boss, the boss and I would disappear and I'd be hurled off and feel really confused, but that only happened once or twice and it only sent me back like a couple of seconds tops. Solar Ash is a gameplay-first experience which finds a way to introduce a fun, unique core loop and keep it fresh throughout. One that emphasizes speed, quick thinking, puzzle solving, and precision. It's one of the more unique games I've played this year, both with how it looks and how it plays, and it hits pretty high on my Game of the Year list, frankly speaking. I had an amazing time with this game, and I continue to as I chase the platinum. This game feels like the best possible execution of its core ideas, so if you looked at this game, and you watched this review, and the ideas it presented resonated with you, and it sounded like a game you'd be interested in playing, I honestly highly doubt it'll disappoint you. My only caveat, like I said in my short review, is that this game is $40 for a game that's about 6 hours long, which is something I'm more than okay with, especially considering the replay value, but I know some people don't like paying that much for a short game, so I thought I'd mention it at least. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, leave a sub if you're new, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.